Welcome to Carrickfergus Vineyard, a place of hope where lives are changing. We're a church in the heart of Carrickfergus, passionate about seeing people's lives changed by the love of Jesus. The following message was given at one of our Sunday services.
How are we all doing? Great. So, let's take a deep breath and let's dive in. Here we go, relationship goals. Hasn't it been brilliant? Yes? Emma Crawford, unbelievable last week. Who was here last week? Brilliant. Hope you've forgiven everyone in your life since then. So, years ago, I was best man for my friend Martin, and the night before he was due to get married, I stayed at his house, his parents' house. And his chief usher, we call it chief usher, I think it's the equivalent here is groomsman. Is that right? Best man, groomsman, ushers. That's the hierarchy here, yeah. So we would call it chief usher. So best man, chief usher, staying with friend who's the groom, parents, night before wedding. In the spare room. Two of us, me, chief usher. Trouble was, it was a double bed. I know. Slightly awkward. Maybe not for the girls, but for the guys. Slightly awkward. My friend, I'm going to just tell him, Ian, he's like really awkward about the whole situation. And he's got himself his side of the bed already. And he's beginning to kind of wind me up already. And I'm loving this. I'm totally playing on it and winding him up too. I nip off to the loo, brush my teeth, all the rest, come back. He's already in the bed. There's a lamp on. I mean, it's the romantic kind of situation. It's just the bizarre. I mean, flashbacks of the situation. And I get, and he's there, and I'm like, okay, my side of the bed's this side of the bed. Okay, dead on. I peel back the covers, and inside the bed, in the middle of the bed, are 3 pillows. 1, 2, and 3 down the middle of the bed. And I'm like, what are you doing? What's the heck? What's going on there? And he says, they're the pillows that separate me and you. If any part of your body crosses those pillows, you're dead. And so, of course, I get into bed, and of course, I start kind of playing footsie over the thing, and he's killing me. He's giving me dead arms and all the rest, and you don't mess with Ian, he's bigger than me. So in that moment, he has created a boundary, a separation between me and him, for him to feel safe and not awkward, and for me to stay in my part of the bed also. This morning, if you haven't gathered already in our relationship goals, we're continuing the theme. We're talking this morning about boundaries in relationships. But before we do that, a quick recap. The story so far, we've talked about exploring the iceberg, the story that we tell ourselves, our family of origin. We talked about crucial conversations. And then last week, as we've said already, we talked a bit about forgiveness. Next week, Chantel will conclude the series on trust, and she'll talk about that. And to tee it up so that you know, during July and August, our summer teaching series is going to be Heroes of the Faith. And we're going to take a hero of the faith, a Bible character, every single week through July and August, and we're going to talk about their lives. As well, if you're a parent during July, there won't be any children's provision that's separate from us, so just a forewarning, but that will return with additional team, like a substitute team through August, and it's just so that you know. And then also, in September onwards, we're going to start teaching the book of Mark. We're going to take a whole season and teach throughout the book of Mark. We might take a break or two during it because it's quite a lot to cover, but just so that you know, that's what's kind of coming up. But back to this series. For some of you, this has come, as we come to an end, this will come as a relief, because we've talked some really personal things, haven't we? We've really kind of gone kind of underneath, got underneath our skin here, haven't we? And the reason is because our relationships affect all of our lives. They impact every area of our life. And in fact, whilst in discussion about this teaching series, a couple from this church, the husband, could see the impact it was having on their wife and was saying, my gosh, this is really hitting home for you. And it was bringing up all kinds of emotions and having to go before the Lord. And it was really, really healthy, but it was really, really painful as well. And the husband lovingly in our church turned to the wife and said, when is this going to end? When is this series going to end? This is exhausting. And so what I want to say to us is well done. Well done. For having the courage to stick with us. Hence the ridiculous picture on the screen of the lion from Wizard of Oz. It takes courage, doesn't it? It's so easy to kind of shelve these things and not go after this stuff, to talk about it. And it takes real courage, not just to talk about it and not just to listen to it, but actually to do something about some of the things that we've been sharing. And we know from our conversations with you, and we know from our life groups, that lots of this is being embedded into our lives. And so let's dive in. What are boundaries? Well, a boundary, from a geographical point of view, is a dividing line. It's what separates one property or jurisdiction and the beginning of another. If you were to buy a property, you would get a map from Land and Registry here, and it would have a very clear line of your boundary line of what is yours and what separates your home, your property from the others around you. But what about a boundary in terms of relationships? Well, in interpersonal relationships, a boundary is what divides one person from another so that each can have separate identities, responsibilities and privileges. A boundary creates the necessary space between individuals. Healthy boundaries define expectations and show respect for others. And so a boundary is for the benefit of both, usually required by one of the two parties, but nonetheless healthy and helpful for both people, so we can act in freedom without the other person impinging, encroaching, or stepping into our space that impacts us negatively. Most of our relationships are healthy. Most of them, just exist. I am me and you are you, and we kind of get on with life, and my life doesn't encroach yours in a negative sense. Sometimes it does. But most of the time, we throughout life, most of our relationships just seem to happen. It's a bit like two nations, maybe European nations, where simply you might be in Belgium and we have our own language and we have our own way of doing things, our own customs, but we could easily drive across the line to the Netherlands and not even notice it. Here we are, because the two nations relate very comfortably and well together. But then sometimes there are some nations that require very definitive borders to separate the two, usually due to conflict. If we take, for example, our nation here in Northern Ireland, there are deliberate peace lines in Belfast and other towns and cities here in Northern Ireland, erected usually to provide a sense of protection between two areas. Sad that is. And so boundaries are needed to be established in our relationships in order to protect oneself from another. And boundaries are found throughout the scriptures. We learn of the earliest boundary right at the very beginning in the Garden of Eden. We read in Genesis that the Lord God commanded the man, "You are free to eat from any tree in that garden, but you must not eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, or if you do, you'll certainly die." God is saying to Adam in that moment, he's saying, all of this is yours. You knock yourself out, eat from there, do this, do that. But you see that one? Don't touch that one. Just don't go near that one. And we're introduced into this wonderful concept of the gift of limits, of limitations. There's so much on offer to us as people. There's so many opportunities, so many things that we can do, but God in his wisdom gives us, his people, limitation. And the whole area of drawing a boundary, sometimes in our relationships, is just another example of the gift of limitations, that we are in a space and a place where we are felt safe and keep protected. Jesus himself had many boundaries. There were many things that Jesus gave his yes to, and there were many things that Jesus said no to. And I want to briefly just kind of go over a number of them. And as I do them, invite the Holy Spirit right now to speak to you through one of these. There'll be one of these or a couple of these, you're like, gosh, Jesus did that, or Jesus didn't do that. That's what probably would be good for me to do. So as we go through them, here we go. Jesus said yes to taking time for himself. Very early in the morning, while it was dark, he got up, left the house, went to a solitary place, and he prayed. He had time for himself. Jesus said yes to choosing friends carefully. When morning came, he called his disciples, whom he designated as apostles. He was very, very deliberate in who his friends would be. Jesus said yes to sticking to his convictions of where to be and who to be with. He said, I must proclaim the good news of the kingdom of God to the other towns. And he went throughout Judea to all the synagogues teaching. He's very deliberate as to where and to whom he would spend his time with. Jesus said yes to asking for help. Gosh, if Jesus needed to do that, how much more would we? In the Garden of Gethsemane, he says to his disciples, my soul is overwhelmed. Stay here. I need your help. Keep watch with me, together with me, would you? And Jesus said yes to hard conversations. And we spoke about that a couple of weeks ago. There's so many examples that we could use where he chose to have the difficult conversations. But Jesus said no to a lot of things too. And in so doing, created healthy boundaries. Jesus said no to being on all of the time. A couple of examples, he sends out the 12, he sends out the 72 to do the work. He goes for tea with Mary and Martha. There were times when he kicked back, where he relaxed, where he chose particular people to recharge his batteries and be with. Jesus said no to pleasing and performing. Jesus is arrested. He's brought to trial. He's brought in front of the Jewish leaders and to the crowds. And he's asked all these number of questions. And he doesn't choose to defend himself. In fact, most of the time, he says nothing. He doesn't choose to please them or perform to them. He only does the will of the Father. Jesus says no to the demands of the people. The news about him spread everywhere. Everyone wanted a slice of the pie. Everyone came to see Jesus. They wanted him to heal them, etc., etc. But he didn't always, did he? He often withdrew to lonely places. He wasn't going to bow down to the needs of all the people. And so sometimes the boundary that he created is he had to say no. Jesus said no to toxic behavior. In Luke 11:37-54, the passage we read, he is invited by a Jewish Pharisee to go for a meal, and during it, he doesn't wash, as was the custom before the meal. And the religious leaders, they're ticked off by this. They're really annoyed, and they begin to point this out. And Jesus uses this as an opportunity to speak against their hypocrisy. Jesus uses it as an opportunity to point out their toxic behavior. He says they're full of greed and wickedness. He says they lack justice and love for God. He pointed out the fact that these religious leaders loved positions of power and responsibility. They got the special seats at the table, and they were honored by the people. Gosh, that's an interesting ringtone. And it goes on. Let's skip on. There were other things that he said in that moment. Jesus said no to manipulation. Matthew 4, we read when Jesus is tempted by the devil, he's taken out into the wild place, and 3 times devil comes to tempt him, but he says no in all of those situations. He uses scripture to counteract the things that were said. He's not going to be manipulated. He's not going to be tempted into that way. And then Jesus says no to bullies and abusers. Again, a definitive boundary that he puts in place. Matthew 18, we read there, if anyone causes these little ones to stumble, it'd be better for a millstone to be torn around the neck and drowned into the sea. We also read in John chapter 8, 1 to 11, that really well-known story when the woman is about to be stoned to death. She's been caught in adultery, which, let's face it, takes 2 to tango. Where was the fella? That's always a good question. But in that moment, Jesus comes alongside, and to the people that are lifting their rocks, he stands up for the woman. He stands up to the bullies, to those who are about to literally murder this lady. He stands up to them, and he does what he does. So how do we know when to set a boundary? Like I said earlier, many of our relationships, they kind of just come and go, and they don't really impinge on each other. But there are some relationships, usually the ones that have most impact on our lives. Family members, potentially neighbors, people in the workplace, could be friendships of ours, whatever it might be. But when do we know? How do we know when we need to set a boundary? And secondly, what kind of boundary are we talking about? Are we talking about, a 2-foot high fence to stop, the dog peeing on our garden? Or are we talking about a 20-foot kind of concrete structure with razor wire fence, CCTV cameras, and armored guards? What kind of boundary are we looking at here? How do we know? Well, here's a few things, 4 things briefly. Firstly, a person's actions towards you are impacting you negatively. This is the most obvious one of all. Of course, whatever it is that this person is doing towards you is impacting your life, negatively speaking. And that's the time for a boundary. Caution in what I'm about to say, because I want to be honoring. But my mum has passed away. Many of you will know that, a number of years. But there, in the latter stages of her life, she would often, we'd have phone calls. We would ring and we'd have just chats. And very often they became very difficult. And there were things that were said, and I just wanted to be an honoring son, and I just wanted to love and be there. But the things that were being said my direction were often troublesome and painful, and I tried really hard to kind of understand and kind of say, what is going on here? And there was actually not much I could kind of do there. And so after a while, I had to establish a boundary, and I had to be really clear. And I said, Mum, I love you dearly, and I love talking, it's catching up. But you see, when things start going off the rails, we can't go there. I'm not going to have that. And I became really, really quite definitive. I set a boundary, and there was a consequence with it. The consequence is, if it goes down there, we're not going to speak. And we need to cease the phone call and what have you. Very difficult, very painful thing to do. Here are just a few questions to consider, taken from this really brilliant book. Good Boundaries and Goodbyes. Here we go. Here's a few things to consider. When you tell others about your relationship, do you find yourself exaggerating the small good things and suppressing the hard bad things? Are you experiencing abuse but afraid to call it that? If the answer to that is yes, seek help immediately from a trained professional. Do you ever discern the other person is lying to you, but when you ask them questions, they get defensive and angry? Do they then, in turn, make you feel like you're the crazy one? When you see a call or a text from them, do you fear that they are about to hijack your peace and send you spiraling emotionally? Are you in love with their potential instead of who they are right now? In conflict with this person, do you often have to take responsibility for everything while they resist taking responsibility for anything? Do you question your worth or your sanity after you have spent time with this person? Are you constantly walking on eggshells because you're afraid of one bad decision or on your part and make the other person walk away? Do you feel unable to share exciting successes in your life with this person for fear of them not celebrating with you, or worse, attacking or belittling you? Do you spend more time trying to save the relationship than enjoying the relationship? Do you fear their choices? Are they resistant to changing a behavior even though they know it's hurting you? Are you suffering more than they are because of what they do? What do the wise people in your life who love you, are invested in your life, and have a good track record of giving helpful advice have to say about this relationship? And there's a few more there, but time is running out. Some good questions to ask of ourselves, of another person. When do we need to set a boundary? When a person's actions towards you are impacting you negatively. Secondly, another reason for a boundary could be that another person's behavior and their action is influencing you negatively. Slightly different. Bad company corrupts good character. As a teacher and as parents, we see this all the time, don't we? We see Johnny's behavior begins to start changing because of the friends that they've started keeping company with. When I became a Christian, I was trying to kind of obey and do the things that were bringing me life. But when I spent time with all my mates that weren't Christians and had the same values, I found I kept doing the same stupid stuff. And so a boundary in terms of the relationship there can be a really healthy thing. Thirdly, a boundary can be put in place when a person creates disharmony and disunity. We read this brilliant passage in Titus when Paul is writing to Titus. He says these words. He says, remind the people to be subject to the rulers and authorities, to be obedient, to be ready, to do whatever is good, to slander to no one, to be peaceful and considerate, and always be gentle towards everyone. He encourages us to do what is good. And then he goes on and says this, but avoid foolish controversies, genealogies, and arguments and quarrels about the law, because these are unprofitable and useless. Warn a divisive person once, and then warn them a second time, and after that, have nothing to do with them. And so Paul is writing to Titus. This is obviously in a church context. We could apply it to our church context, but we could apply it to any of our relational contexts, our families, our neighbors, people that we come into contact with. A person that's divisive, a person that's working behind the scenes, who's trying to create division. They're trying to convey their own narrative, and it's just really, really unhelpful. And it's all done behind the scenes, and it's just really unhelpful. So Paul writes to Titus, he says, have nothing to do with a divisive person. That would be a boundary. Fourth, when a person is becoming too dependent on you. For many of us who are Christians, well-meaning, we love one another. We want to care for one another. We want to spend time. We want to really help people. Of course we do. But often the other person can become, if we allow it, if we don't have clear boundaries in place, that person can become too dependent on us. You will have heard the well-known phrase, don't work hard on someone else's problems than they are prepared to do themselves. And so an example of a boundary in that could be the amount of time that you spend with them. It could be how they are able to communicate with you. You know, it's Saturday night, you're having dinner, you're out, and then suddenly this text message comes from this person, and you're like, oh gosh, I'm meant to be out enjoying myself. And here's this person needing me again. And while we're on the subject, a brief interlude, let's kind of slightly divert. Healthy boundary communications is just being considerate about how we communicate actually with one another. When you're sending a message or when you're making a phone call or whatever it is, consider the time of day that it is. Consider the day of week that it might be. Also the use of social media. I remember 2 or 3 years ago politely sort of saying, please don't message Chantel on Facebook directly. That's her private kind of place, and thank you. That doesn't happen. That's a communications kind of boundary that's really healthy. Very often, if you want to get hold of someone, probably an email is a really good thing to do, or next time when you see them. And for goodness sake, don't just turn up at their door. That doesn't happen anymore, but a brief little story because it's sort of funny. Years ago, it was tea time. The kids were young, And this bloke turned up at my door. And he knocked on the door. He says, "Are you Pastor Paul Daniels?" I was like, "Oh gosh, where's this going?" I said, "Yes." And it was some Christian magazine jobby thing, and wanted me to take them and give them to people in church. I said, "Excuse me, like, who are you? Like, how do you know where I live?" He said, I can't believe I'm saying this. He says, "I make it my business to know where all the church leaders live." Goodbye. Anyway, that was that one. And very briefly, another brief interlude. Healthy marriages. I didn't have time to really think this one through. But just there's some really good healthy boundaries to protect our marriages. Not being alone with other people. Not developing deep friendships with other people outside of our spouse. I know they're obvious things, but they do happen. And they do happen, and well-meaning things might develop into other things. And there's other things that I could probably talk about there, but we don't have time. But just ways that we would protect into our marriages. Okay, we have 4 minutes to land this. How to set a healthy boundary. How do we go about doing it? If you feel like some of those things that we've talked about require a boundary to be put in place, how do you go about doing it? Well, assuming you've already gone down the road of a crucial conversation or crucial conversations. You've kind of had that and nothing's changing. You're like, gosh, something a bit more decisive needs to take place. Well, encourage you to seek the counsel of other wise people. Talk it through with someone else that you trust. This is not a gossipful thing. This is not a whatever, but it's a help me, empower me to make a really good choice. Come up with a plan, and then you must communicate it to the other person. You cannot just simply do what many of us do, and that's avoid the person. You know, it's if this is a relationship that needs to exist still, I need to lovingly communicate with the other person the impact that the relationship is having on you first and foremost, and then begin to say what it is that you are wanting to do to protect you and to protect and honor the other person. Remember, it's about them also. Also, it's important to state clearly what potential consequences there are if the boundary is broken. If there's no consequence, then it is unlikely that it will be taken seriously. Very briefly, a couple of examples. And there's loads in this book that are really, really good. Here's a couple of examples of the communication between two. I can tell you care a lot about politics and the issues that you are passionate about. Thank you for wanting to share all your thoughts with me, but I'm in a place right now where I need to guard my heart from the intensity that can sometimes arise in these kinds of discussions. Thank you for understanding that if the conversation about certain topics get too heated, I'll either need to redirect the conversation to less triggering subjects, or we will have to hit the pause button. Acknowledging what's going on, explaining how it impacts you, clearly defining the boundary, and then the consequence if the boundary is crossed. One more. I love you and I care about you. And at the same time, there are some behaviors that are requiring me to make changes to our relationship. When you, whatever the behavior is, substance abuse, addiction, is in my presence, it affects me in ways that I am no longer willing to accept. This isn't an accusation or judgment against you. You're an adult and your choices are your own. This is about me being proactive about my well-being and making wise choices for myself. So I am requesting that you no longer use these substances or whatever the unhealthy behavior is around me or my home. If you are unable to agree to these parameters, then we'll need to limit our interactions, and I can no longer have you visit my home. Again, this is because I care not only about my well-being, but also about keeping our relationship in a more sustainable place. Describing what the behavior is, how it's impacting you, the line that you're drawing, and the potential consequences that take place. And then sit back and enjoy the peace. Easy peasy. Isn't it wonderful? Establishing boundaries in some of our key core relationships can have a massive impact on your life in a healthy way. In a really, really healthy way for you and for the sake of the other. Let's land the plane. Setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's the path to health and fruitfulness that God wants you to experience. And I know that over the last number of weeks, many of us have been proactively putting the things that we've been teaching into practice. Let's not be, it was just for that season. You know, the teachings are done. We can always go back to them. It's an ongoing thing in our lives that we're making these healthy choices. But as we begin to make healthy lifestyle, relational choices in our lives, very likely the people that we have our relationships with aren't going to be pursuing the same healthy track that we are. Very likely you put a boundary in place, the person that you put it in place with is not going to like it. And there's going to be a degree of kickback in that. And that's just being aware of. As you pursue health, others around you may not be pursuing it in such a way. So don't be surprised if after today you begin to act some of these things and actually you're in for some choppy waters. That is likely to happen. Folks, you're going to have a lot of fun in your life groups talking about this week. Bless you. And we're done.
Thanks for listening to the Carrickfergus Vineyard podcast. If you'd like to find out more about our church, please visit our website, carrickfergusvineyard.org.